For years, Eleanor had been nothing more than a shadow, ignored, dismissed, and harassed simply for her age. Every whispered insult, every stolen opportunity, every cruel smirk had chipped away at her confidence. But when a powerful ally emerges, none other than Scarlett Johansson, Eleanor is faced with a choice: remain invisible or fight for the respect she deserves. As the world watches, will Eleanor finally be seen? Or will her voice be drowned out once more? Before we begin, let us know where you are watching from. And if you believe in fighting the helpless and showing kindness to humanity, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Let us begin.
Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, the soft hum of the morning sun barely breaking through the blinds. At 60, she had lived a life of resilience, patience, and quiet strength. But today, something felt different. The years of unnoticed hard work, the countless sacrifices she had made, were beginning to weigh heavily on her shoulders. Every wrinkle on her face told a story, every gray strand in her hair a reminder of battles fought. And yet, despite everything she had endured, Eleanor found herself still fighting, still struggling, but now for something far more elusive: respect. Have you ever felt invisible, as though the world just doesn't see you anymore? As if your worth is measured by an arbitrary standard that doesn't fit who you truly are? For Eleanor, this feeling was all too familiar. In her workplace, the younger colleagues barely acknowledged her presence. Her boss never bothered to learn her name, let alone her skills. Ageism, a quiet but insidious form of discrimination, had seeped into every corner of her life. The very experience she had gained over decades was suddenly deemed irrelevant. And the worst part? Eleanor was just expected to accept it. But how long can someone endure this kind of treatment before something inside them snaps? Eleanor's story isn't just about a woman growing older, it's about a person who has lived through decades of discrimination and harassment. It's the story of a woman who once had dreams, who once felt like she could change the world, but now finds herself just trying to survive it. She is not alone in her struggles, though. Many others, like her, are quietly battling the same fight. So, what happens when Eleanor finally decides she's had enough? Through her eyes, we'll see a world that often overlooks the elderly, a world where their voices are silenced, and their contributions dismissed. Yet Eleanor refuses to be silenced. But will her voice be enough? Will she find the courage to take a stand, or will the weight of a lifetime of mistreatment push her deeper into the shadows? Stay with us, and let's uncover Eleanor's journey, because her fight is more than just her own. It's a fight for dignity, for equality, and for a future where no one is ever overlooked again. Eleanor had always been a hard worker, a woman who believed that dedication and effort would speak for themselves. Yet, as the years passed, something had shifted, at least, in the way the world saw her. In the office where she worked as a receptionist, she was invisible. The young employees spoke over her, the younger bosses rarely acknowledged her, and the very skills she had honed over decades seemed to mean nothing anymore. Every morning, Eleanor put on her best smile, trying to fight against the creeping feeling that her age had become her biggest enemy. She had always taken pride in her job, answering calls, keeping the office organized, and being the friendly face that people could rely on. But as the younger staff members moved up the ladder, she was pushed aside. Every suggestion she made in meetings was brushed off with an uncomfortable laugh or a quick change of subject. No one seemed to care about her experience anymore, only about the next new thing. Have you ever felt like you were being passed over, as though the very thing that makes you who you are is no longer valued? Eleanor felt that sting every single day. It wasn't just the dismissive remarks or the lack of acknowledgement. It was the little things. The way her boss would ask the younger employees for ideas but never seemed to notice when Eleanor was the one doing the actual work behind the scenes. The way they would make offhand comments about old-fashioned ways when Eleanor suggested anything, even though her suggestions were practical and experience-based. And the daily feeling of being forgotten, her hard work not even worthy of a thank you. It wasn't just the workplace atmosphere that made things harder, it was the subtle, sometimes overt, harassment. There were the jokes about her age, the way the younger women would laugh and gossip about how She's not as quick as she used to be. Eleanor would smile, pretending it didn't hurt. But every word, every laugh, cut deeper than the last. It wasn't just about her age, it was about her worth as a person. What do you do when the world around you insists that you're no longer important? That your time has passed, and you're just a relic of a bygone era? Eleanor spent her days in a quiet rebellion, fighting a battle that no one could see. At her desk, she would organize files with precision, make sure every task was completed on time, and yet no one would notice. Her every move was watched, her every word criticized, as though her value was diminished simply because she was older. It wasn't just the subtle, constant dismissal that wore her down. It was the way her colleagues spoke to her, as if she were a burden they had to bear. The young men, who would stop by her desk just to chat, would often make condescending comments about how she didn't get the modern world, how her generation didn't understand the new age of work. Eleanor had spent her entire life adapting to change, learning new skills, and keeping up with the times. But all they saw was her age, and they didn't care to look any deeper. One day, as Eleanor sat at her desk, organizing the never-ending stack of paperwork, her boss, someone half her age, called her into his office. The words that came out of his mouth left her reeling. "Eleanor," he said, without looking up from his computer screen, "I think it's time for you to start thinking about retirement. You're just not keeping up like you used to. Maybe we could help you find something more suitable for someone of your age." The room seemed to freeze, the air thick with humiliation. Eleanor blinked, trying to process the words that had just been spoken. How had she gone from being a valued employee to someone who wasn't keeping up? How had the very skills that had carried her for years become irrelevant overnight? What was it about age that made people forget all that you had contributed? Eleanor stood there in stunned silence, her mind racing. Was she supposed to just accept this? Was she meant to walk away, quietly bowing out of a life she had worked so hard to build? No. That wasn't Eleanor. She wasn't the type to let herself be erased that easily. But how could she fight a system that seemed so intent on diminishing her? As the days passed, Eleanor felt the weight of the discrimination pressing down on her. The little things, the snide remarks from the younger staff, the constant belittling, began to feel unbearable. It wasn't just about one comment from her boss or one moment of disrespect. It was the accumulation of years of feeling unseen, unheard, and unimportant. Eleanor's determination to stand her ground began to stir something within her. She didn't want to quit. She wasn't ready to let them win. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this fight was not just for her, it was for every person who had ever been made to feel irrelevant, for every person whose voice had been silenced because of something as arbitrary as age. As she walked out of the office that evening, Eleanor's mind was made up. The next day would be different. She wasn't going to let them push her out. She would find a way to make her voice heard, to stand up for herself and for everyone who had ever been made to feel small because of their age. But could she really do it? Could Eleanor, who had spent so many years quietly enduring, find the courage to fight back against a system that seemed so indifferent to her struggle? One afternoon, as she sat in front of the television, flipping through channels, Eleanor came across a program that caught her attention. It was an interview with Scarlett Johansson, the Hollywood actress known for her advocacy for women's rights and equality. Scarlett wasn't just a famous face on the screen. She had used her platform to fight for issues that mattered, especially the discrimination women faced in various industries, including ageism. Scarlett had spoken out about the challenges older women faced in Hollywood, where younger faces were always in demand, and talent and experience seemed secondary to appearance. Eleanor admired Scarlett for using her voice to speak for those who were often ignored, and for standing up for the rights of women who were often silenced. During the interview, Scarlett spoke passionately about the importance of uplifting women, no matter their age, background, or circumstances. She shared stories of her own experiences, revealing how she had faced her own battles in the public eye, and how she had learned to push back against the expectations society placed on women. She encouraged women everywhere to speak out against discrimination, no matter how small or large the injustices they faced. Eleanor felt a spark ignite inside her. It was like someone had lit a fire in her that had been smoldering for years. Watching Scarlett, so confident, so unapologetic, made her realize that she didn't have to keep enduring the disrespect she had been receiving. Maybe she could use her own voice too. Maybe she could be like Scarlett Johansson and stand up for herself. But more importantly, maybe she could use her struggles to help others who were going through the same thing. For days, Eleanor couldn't shake the image of Scarlett, speaking out against ageism, against the systems that sought to silence women. The more she thought about it, the more Eleanor felt like she had found her purpose, something she hadn't realized was missing in her life, the strength to fight back. She wasn't a celebrity like Scarlett. She wasn't a well-known figure with millions of followers. But Eleanor realized that every small voice mattered. She had to stop allowing others to make her feel like she was invisible. If Scarlett could stand up in front of cameras and make a difference, why couldn't Eleanor do the same in her own life? Eleanor began taking small steps toward reclaiming her confidence. She started to talk to her coworkers more openly about the way she was being treated. She brought up her concerns with her boss, who continued to dismiss her ideas. But this time, she wasn't just letting the words roll off her back. She was standing her ground. And the more she did, the more she realized that Scarlett Johansson's words had given her a new kind of strength. The catalyst for change had been sparked, but it wasn't just Eleanor's newfound resolve that was making waves. It was the realization that she wasn't alone in her fight. Eleanor reached out to Scarlett's foundation, where she found a network of women who were also struggling against similar forms of discrimination. In that community, Eleanor found support, solidarity, and the power to speak out. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was part of a movement. The women she connected with shared their stories of harassment, marginalization, and invisibility, just like her. They were also older women who had felt the sting of discrimination, and they were determined to rise above it. Eleanor knew that her fight was far from over. But with Scarlett Johansson's words still ringing in her ears, she felt a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in years. No longer would she quietly endure. She had seen how one woman could inspire change, and now it was her turn. Could Eleanor really make a difference in the workplace? Could she truly challenge the system that had marginalized her for so long? And would Scarlett Johansson's message of strength, solidarity, and fighting back be the key to unlocking the power she never knew she had? The next day, as Eleanor walked into the office, she felt something different in the air. It wasn't just the usual hum of activity, or the sound of ringing phones. It was a palpable sense of anticipation. People were whispering, their voices barely audible over the usual noise. Eleanor soon realized what was happening. Scarlett Johansson, the famous actress and advocate for social justice, was visiting their office. Scarlett wasn't just a household name, she had become a symbol for those who had been silenced and marginalized. She had used her platform to speak out against discrimination, harassment, and inequality, and had launched several initiatives aimed at empowering individuals who felt powerless in the face of systemic injustice. Her work had inspired countless people, including Eleanor, who had watched from the sidelines, wishing she had the courage to take a stand like Scarlett did. As Scarlett entered the building, Eleanor watched from her desk, feeling a mix of awe and envy. There was something about the way Scarlett carried herself, confident, unapologetic, and always fighting for what was right, that drew people to her. It wasn't just her fame that captivated the room. It was the way she used her voice to create real change. But for Eleanor, it was a reminder of everything she felt she was missing: her own voice, lost in a sea of ageism, harassment, and neglect. Scarlett made her way through the office, greeting everyone with a warm smile and engaging in casual conversation. She had an undeniable presence, and Eleanor couldn't help but be captivated by her energy. But what truly stood out to Eleanor was how Scarlett spoke to everyone. It wasn't just the superficial politeness that came with celebrity visits. No, Scarlett genuinely listened. She took time to understand each person's perspective, making them feel seen in a way that Eleanor hadn't experienced in years. When Scarlett arrived at Eleanor's desk, their eyes met for the briefest of moments. Scarlett's gaze softened, and she smiled warmly at Eleanor, almost as though she knew what she was going through. Eleanor was taken aback. Here was a woman who had everything: fame, fortune, influence. Yet she was taking the time to make sure Eleanor, a receptionist with decades of experience, didn't feel invisible. "Hi, I'm Scarlett," she said, extending her hand with a genuine friendliness that made Eleanor feel like she mattered for the first time in ages. "I'm Eleanor," she replied, shaking Scarlett's hand, her voice slightly trembling. "I'm just the receptionist." Scarlett smiled knowingly. "Just the receptionist? I think your role here is far more important than that. Everyone deserves to be seen, don't you think?" Eleanor was stunned. This wasn't just small talk. It was as if Scarlett had seen through the layers of her frustration and exhaustion and knew exactly how she felt. Scarlett continued, her voice steady and warm. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about what it means to be silenced. How often people like you, like me, are dismissed simply because of who we are or what we represent. You've worked here for years, and yet no one seems to recognize your worth. Doesn't that make you angry?" Eleanor had to swallow the lump in her throat. Was this really happening? Was she talking to Scarlett Johansson, someone who had fought for the rights of the marginalized, about her own struggles with discrimination and invisibility? "I don't know," Eleanor admitted, her voice shaking. "I've always tried to do my best, but lately it feels like no one notices. They just push me aside." Scarlett's expression hardened slightly, the sympathy in her eyes shifting to something more determined. "I get that," she said. "I've faced that kind of treatment, too. Being told that I don't belong in a room, being told that my voice isn't as important because of who I am or how I look. But here's the thing, your worth isn't tied to the way people treat you. You've earned everything you have, and it's time for you to take back what's yours." Eleanor felt something stir deep within her. She had spent so long accepting the mistreatment, telling herself it was just part of growing older. But hearing these words from someone who had fought on the front lines for change, someone who had used their platform to uplift the voices of the oppressed, it was a revelation. "You don't have to fight the world alone," Scarlett continued, her voice calm but firm. "You've got your voice. You just have to use it. And when you do, you'll find people who will stand with you, people who are ready to listen, people who will make sure your voice is heard." Eleanor felt a fire ignite inside her. The idea of speaking up, of challenging the system that had ignored her for so long, was both terrifying and exhilarating. She wasn't sure how she could do it, but one thing was clear: this moment, this encounter with Scarlett, was a turning point. She wasn't going to let herself be silenced any longer. Scarlett smiled warmly, almost as though she could read Eleanor's thoughts. "I believe in you, Eleanor. And I'm sure the world will, too." With that, Scarlett moved on, but her words remained with Eleanor. As she sat back down at her desk, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. It was time to take action, not just for herself, but for every person who had been made to feel invisible, dismissed, or discarded because of their age, gender, or any other reason. Eleanor wasn't just the receptionist anymore. She was a woman who had a voice, and she was going to use it. Eleanor's transformation wasn't instantaneous, but with Scarlett Johansson's encouragement, she began to speak out more, challenging the assumptions that had once been placed on her. At work, she began standing up for herself when her colleagues ignored her input or dismissed her ideas. She found her voice, and while the road wasn't easy, she grew stronger each day. But the true test came when an all-office meeting was called to discuss the future of the company. This meeting, like so many before it, had always been dominated by the younger, more vocal employees. Eleanor had been relegated to the sidelines for years, quietly taking notes as others spoke over her. But this time, she was prepared to speak up. As the meeting began, the same manager who had belittled her in the past, David, started to dominate the conversation once again, pushing his agenda and ignoring her. It was as if he didn't even see her sitting there, as if her years of experience and wisdom had no value to him. But Eleanor wasn't going to let this slide. How often do we find ourselves in situations where we feel invisible, unheard, like we don't matter? Have you ever felt that way? Eleanor took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly, but her resolve was firm. She knew this moment was her opportunity to make a difference, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been overlooked because of their age, their gender, or any other reason. With a voice that rang out clear and confident, she spoke up, challenging David's proposal. "I don't think that's the right direction," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the nerves racing through her. "I've been here for years. I've seen what works and what doesn't, and I'm telling you, we're missing something. This plan doesn't take into account the experience of the people who have been here the longest." The room fell silent. Eleanor had never spoken up like this before, and the shock on her colleagues' faces was palpable. But instead of cowering, she held her ground. She went on to explain how the company's recent shift in strategy wasn't going to succeed without understanding the needs of their long-term employees. She backed her words with facts, drawing on her years of experience. David tried to brush her off, as he always had, but Eleanor wasn't about to let him silence her again. The more she spoke, the more her confidence grew, and soon, she had the entire room's attention. When the meeting ended, David's proposal was put on hold, and Eleanor's ideas were considered. It was a victory not just for her, but for everyone who had ever felt overlooked or disregarded. This was her moment of triumph, and the beginning of a new chapter. Eleanor had fought back against years of discrimination, harassment, and invisibility. She had taken control of her story. And as she walked out of that meeting, her heart was lighter than it had been in years. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she truly mattered. The days that followed the meeting were a whirlwind for Eleanor. She had never expected such a swift change. Her colleagues, who had once dismissed her, began to treat her with newfound respect. David, though still reluctant to fully accept her authority, started to recognize her contributions. Eleanor's courage had shifted something within the office dynamic. It was no longer about her being invisible, it was about her being seen, heard, and respected. But more than the immediate respect she earned at work, the biggest change was in how Eleanor viewed herself. She no longer saw herself as just the old receptionist. She was a woman with power, wisdom, and the ability to change things. The very things that had once made her feel insignificant, her age, her experience, were now her greatest assets. How many times have we let the opinions of others define our worth? How often do we let fear keep us from stepping into our full potential? Eleanor began to speak up not just at work, but in her personal life as well. She reconnected with old friends, people she had distanced herself from out of embarrassment or fear of being judged. She became involved in local initiatives for older adults, advocating for their rights and ensuring they had a platform to share their stories. It wasn't just about fighting back against the injustices she faced, it was about creating space for others who felt the same way. Her journey wasn't easy, change never is. There were setbacks, and there were moments of doubt. But with every challenge she faced, Eleanor grew stronger. She began to see her life as a testament to resilience, a story of overcoming hardship and discrimination, and ultimately, finding her voice. One evening, after an inspiring talk at a community event about ageism and harassment, Eleanor received a message from Scarlett Johansson. Scarlett thanked her for the work she was doing and offered to collaborate on initiatives to further raise awareness. Eleanor was in awe. What started as a fleeting moment of encouragement had now turned into a lasting, supportive partnership. Scarlett had become not only an inspiration but an ally, someone who would help amplify Eleanor's efforts. As she read the message, Eleanor couldn't help but reflect on the journey she had traveled, from feeling invisible to becoming a powerful advocate for change. It wasn't just about fighting the system, it was about embracing the strength within herself. She had spent too many years doubting her worth, believing that her time had passed. But now, Eleanor knew that it was never too late to make a difference.